It's interesting.
Yes, it's a communication system to gradually and carefully communicate with your neighbors. It's not there to be used indiscriminately just to kill everything off, because in the soil, in ecosystems, it's a system of thousands of types of organisms that need to learn to live together. And if you wipe out one of them indiscriminately, something's going to take its place. I know I'm going on and on about this, but it's important. Our skin is covered with hundreds of different types of bacteria. And if you kill some of them off, like with antibacterial soaps or something like that, then the ones that are not as friendly to you are going to start taking over. So it's more like a balanced system.
Yes.
Where you need all of the components. And our limited, narrow-minded thinking has led us to believe that we are intelligent to know which ones we can kill off and which ones we shouldn't, which is causing lots and lots of problems. So anyway, that's just one example of how the mechanistic paradigm has kind of led us astray. And we've used all these kind of magic bullets and these kind of neutron bomb techniques to improve our health. But in the long run, it doesn't work because nature adapts, the bacteria adapts. So what we're learning is that things are systems. And when you deal with systems, you need a system-wide approach. You can't look at it indiscriminately and say, I'm just going to keep this and get rid of that and keep this. It doesn't work that way.
Speaking of that, Dr. Hines, I have a business organization called the Rainmaking Company.
Yes.
And I provide a whole systems approach to opportunity sharing, to deal making, to financing, to raising financing, to marketing, to communication. In consultation, all these other areas are never left out just because somebody wants to bring their product to market or raise funds or have a communications strategy that works for them. The whole systems approach is really lacking in the public mind and understanding. And that's also why I feel like your book is critical, plus also D. Hawk's book on chaotic or chaos organizations. But I want you to go back and I want you to lay out the framework for the public on what is resonance and how does it distinguish itself from frequency or non-locality.
Right. So in contrast to this more mechanistic way of looking at things just at the surface, the resonant paradigm looks at things more in terms of vibration and frequency and resonance. So the idea is basically the example I used in Opening Minds is that like two tuning forks, if they're tuned to the same frequency and you hit one, the other one will start ringing spontaneously.
Yes.
And that's kind of like a very simple example of a non-local interaction. In other words, because they're vibrating at the same frequency, they automatically interact.
I need to go a little deeper into this so we are actually on the same page with the public. What do you mean by vibrating at the same frequency?
Well, the best example of that would be just a radio station.
Yes.
Or radio waves, or even how we're talking on the phone right now at a distance.
Correct.
We're aware that all of the radio waves in the world are around us all the time, but you won't perceive them unless you have the right receiver.
Tuning. Correct.
Like your cell phone. There's a lot of other people talking on the cell phone, but you're on your own frequency for that moment. It's just you and your guest. So, in the same way that all the signals are around us all the time, you're only receiving what frequency your particular biological subtle energy system is working on. Your thoughts, your biology, all of it together. And in other words, rather than looking at it like you have to initiate the interaction, the resonant paradigm sees things as a more complete system where everything is kind of all happening at once, but you just get that frequency that you're on at the time, which creates the reality that you're perceiving. So basically, instead of going out there to change the world, you more focus on changing your own particular frequency, just like you tune to a different channel on the TV.
Is that where you explain in the book, under the time section, that your body is like a signal processor, an etheric machine? Is that an example of that?
Yeah, because a lot of the research is showing increasingly that our cells even communicate this way. The mechanistic way of looking at our body would be, well, the cells communicate, through these different chemical messengers and so forth. It's still a very direct physical process. But a lot of the research increasingly shows that even cells that are next to each other communicate through frequency. And just an example of that, there's the work of Fritz Popp in Germany, who showed that cells communicate through light. They did these interesting studies where they took similar cells and they separated them by glass, and then they coated the glass over with a black paint or darkened it, and they found that there was a difference in the way the cells grew if there was light coming through the glass, if there wasn't, between just very thin plate of glass, which suggested that the cells are communicating to each other in some way that we can't easily explain. But it's not happening through chemicals. It's happening through light.
You explain also in the book that matter that has to do with blips of energy and light, the whole idea of time and space, and what appears to be solid is not. You say that the state of quantum fields is affected by those who observe them and can take on the form of a wave or a particle depending on the situation. So basically, our belief structures are really telling us what's real and what's not real. But what do you mean when you say the quantum fields are affected by those who observe them and can take on the form of a wave or a particle? What does that mean?
Well, that is another really important component of this whole discussion. It's because the paradigm, the Newtonian Cartesian paradigm, the mechanistic paradigm, sees objects, as being solid, right? As physically there. And the weird thing about quantum mechanics, which has not really been disproved yet in any way, is that it doesn't seem that there is anything there, because if you look at the subatomic level, subatomic particles are mostly empty space. In other words, everything you see around you, things you can touch and see and hear, those are not really physical objects. If you look at the amount of space in there compared to the particles themselves in like a molecule, for example, they are proportionally as empty as intergalactic space. And even if you can find the actual particle itself, a neutrino or electron or all the different types of particles that exist in quantum mechanics, they're still just blips of energy blinking on and off in this big vacuum. So what quantum mechanics tells us is that solid objects are like 99.99999% empty space with a little bit of energy there that gives the illusion of solidity. And when you put your hand against something and it feels solid, it's just because the electron orbital shells are bumping up against each other. It's not that there's anything really touching.
Absolutely fascinating. So basically, we're tuning in such little amounts of what's occurring that even our sense of reality is impaired, just being human. Could we say that?
Yeah, it really is. If you think of all the possibilities of what this energy system can be, it's really reduced down just to a tiny little shadow of what it really is. And what reduces it down, obviously, is our belief systems about what we think is there.
Now, I noticed that you spoke on page 33 in your book, Opening Minds, about fractals, that they're self-regulating and self-organized. Talk about why you mentioned fractals, and what does fractals have to do with resonance, and what does it have to do with remote sensing or remote viewing?
Well, that's really interesting, because the type of mathematics that I grew up with in graduate school was still based on this linear idea with a certain sense of predictability and idea that you could control things if you could figure out the mathematical equations. And what fractal geometry shows us is that nature isn't really based on lines. It's based on these kind of fractured patterns of shapes that are based on branching structures, right? You can see this clearly in, the way your hair looks in trees and lots of things, clouds. They're continually breaking off into smaller and smaller pieces. Like, think of your bronchial system in your lungs,
Okay.
It keeps branching off into smaller and smaller little tubules in your lungs so that they can interact with the capillaries for maximum oxygen transfer. So the way nature designs systems for maximum flow through is not to design one really big thing that works in a very predictable way, but it's to design lots of branching structures so that it's very resilient, right?
Okay.
And so there's lots of surface area. So basically what mathematicians discovered, they actually discovered this a long time ago, Kim, but they were really afraid of fractals because they called them like mathematical monsters. They weren't easy to understand. And then the work of different mathematicians showed that things like signal line noise in a telephone line kind of behaved like this. And now they're finding that even weather patterns are much more you can model them much better if you look at them like a fractal then if